So, Swamiji believes and lives that the goal is not to live forever. Anyone born has to one day leave this world. But the ambition is to create something for the world, for humanity, which will last forever even after we are gone. And he has created such a great institution. I'm sure sooner than later the rest of the world will follow. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, many years ago I discovered the secret of doing something worthwhile in this world. It's to realize that you can't do anything worthwhile and he can do anything. I remember when I was a young man and I decided I wanted to help other people to know truth. Well, the fact that I didn't know truth myself was a severe limitation. And I would put a piece of paper in the typewriter and type page 1, chapter 1. I couldn't think what to say. But after meeting Master, I have so much to say. I think this is a very important thing in communities, which is what I'm talking about this morning. Cooperative communities, intentional communities in Dwapara Yuga. Leadership is a very important aspect of that. But a leader is not somebody who is more important than other people. He is somebody who is a servant of everybody, who thinks in terms of how he can help people. And there's another aspect. I know that I mentioned to Mr. Kartikeyan yesterday, we talked about leadership in communities, and he said, a leader must be a good follower. And I said, I don't know that I agree. And he said, well, but you're a perfect follower of your guru. I said, there's the difference. If I have somebody worthwhile to follow, I'll follow him. But people who follow just because somebody is in charge and will accept any idiocy in the name of obedience will impose idiocy on other people. I think the first important thing is that if a person is a leader, he must have a strong sense of truth. What is right? And he must have in that in that sense also an awareness of humility in knowing that whatever his opinions are could be wrong. But there is a truth out there. And if he finds somebody who can represent that truth, that is the person worth listening to. I used to seem to be a very arrogant young man. Maybe I was. But the fact is I just wouldn't listen to anybody. I know when I was 5 years old, not exactly a young man yet, my mother wanted to teach me how to write and read. And I looked at her skeptically. I said, and how do you know? You're not a teacher, you're just a mother. And so they had somebody come from England who could teach us. Well, this was a very cheeky attitude, but it has been basic to me. If somebody's going to tell me something, I want to believe first that he has a right to say it, either because of the authority with which he speaks from his own experience, or because of his whatever it is in life, not necessarily position, because I have seen a lot of very prominent people and so-called experts making foolish mistakes. But I remember my father one time, he was an oil geologist, and I'm very much against this insistence of geology that everything is gradual. I'm sure there have been great cataclysms also that have determined the history of the human race. And I mentioned certain aspects, for example, of Mexico City being so high, and I forget exactly the context, but he was very much against that kind of theory. And he said, and I said I wouldn't agree with him. And he said, don't you think you should respect my opinion? I said, I do respect it as an opinion. And, and I'm afraid I drove him wild. But the truth is, I could not find anybody that I would listen to. It was not just because things had to be reasonable. Truth had to resonate with my heart. When I was a child, I used to play with truth in such a way to show myself how uncertain a thing is reason. I might have said, but didn't in fact, say to my mother, I was not very fond of spinach, but I might have given her as a reason for not giving me spinach that it's green, and green is the color of envy. And besides, spinach has this sort of bitter taste, and you don't want your son growing up bitterly envious, do you? And I would have used that argument completely for fun, knowing that it was ridiculous, but the underlying serious purpose of it was to persuade myself that reason alone cannot give you truth. So many things seem reasonable and are not true. And so I always had to feel in my heart first. Now, the astounding thing happened to me when I read Autobiography of a Yogi. On page 8, Lahiri Mahasaya is materializing in a wheat field. There are so many miracles in that book that were totally beyond all experience of mine. I remember, in fact, having an argument with my mother because she was believing in the miracles of saints, and I said, Mother, don't be ridiculous. When I read that book, I knew he was speaking the truth. I took the next bus across the country to California from New York. I couldn't accept those miracles intellectually, so I put them on a shelf. Because I said, I don't know, but I do know him. He's true. And my first words to him were, I want to be your disciple. I have never regretted those words. For the first time in my life, fortunately not the last time, I met someone whom I knew to be true. Now, I think this is what a leader needs to be. Somebody who will follow his inner guidance, not because somebody says so, but because something in him knows that this is what must be done. This is the first quality of leadership in a community. The second important quality for leadership in a community is a sense of one's own unimportance. Leadership is simply a skill, like painting, like carpentry, like cooking, like so many things. You learn how to work with people, you learn what works, you learn what doesn't work. You may have been in high positions in the past and therefore have come to understand that it's totally unimportant. So, not to feel important, but to feel that what you are doing is important. And there have been two guidelines in our community, which now that we are celebrating our 40th anniversary, I'd like to suggest the old saying, life begins at 40. We've been here long enough to show that we have shown that we know what we're doing. We're not just beating around in the bush. And we know that we have something worthwhile to share with other people. And I'm finding more and more young people coming, and it thrills me to see it, because I would like to see you young people go out and start other communities. But remember that leadership is a very important part of it. Too many communities sort of try to let I know David Frawley, who is a very well-known teacher of Ayurveda and so on in America. He's come to Ananda a few times. Somebody, I think Jyotish and Devi said to him one time years ago, of all the different communities you've seen in America, which ones do you think are the best? And he said, well, Ananda, and Ananda. And he said to me that I've seen all the ashrams in America. I've seen all the new communities. The one community that I think will outlive its founder is Ananda, because you have not tried to do it yourself. You've understood that you need many hands to make a miracle. You've understood that many, many different talents are needed. And you've been able to work through people to make leaders out of them. I have always looked for the qualities of leadership in people. When I found people who wanted to be leaders, I haven't made them leaders. When I've found people who wanted to serve and wanted to do a good thing and had the integrity to do it in spite of what other people thought, then I said, this is the right one. And every one that I've appointed, as far as I can recollect, has proved true. But it is not, we have to have a sense of the importance of what we're doing. The important thing is not to feel important. What's so important about being important? I remember, this is a story that Asha was telling in her church yesterday, that when they had that installation of Dick Baker as the Roshi in the Zen Center in San Francisco, afterwards I was talking to a young woman there, and after a while I said to her, what's your name? And she told me, and she said, what's your name? And I said, Swami Kriyananda. Swami Kriyananda? But you're famous. I said, well, maybe, but why do you have to say but? And she said, well, all the other famous people I've met seem important. Well, I could have taken this as an insult, but I took it rather as a delightful statement. It's so nice not to seem important. It's so nice not to be important. It's what we're doing that matters. And if we can get that thought through our thick heads, we can accomplish something in this world. You know, I've never been nervous speaking in public. Master gave me every reason in the world to be nervous. I'd been with him less than 8 months. I was still 22 years old. I had been to one Kriya initiation. I was learning the teachings, but I knew that Master was appearing alternate Sundays, Hollywood, San Diego, because my job was to send the announcements into the papers to let them know when he would be speaking. And this coming Sunday in San Diego, it had been announced that he would speak. He had not been there for 2 months, and I could imagine the thrill of all those people finally having him come back after this length of time. Saturday morning, Reverend Bernard came and told me, Master wants you to give the service in his place, and he wants you to give a Kriya initiation afterwards. And I think probably that was the best thing possible. I couldn't possibly be nervous. I was too worried about those poor people. Here they were coming to hear their guru. They were people leaning in the window from outside. They couldn't find even standing room in the church. And the place was just completely packed. And I thought, oh, you poor people. There's a curtain that was closed, and when it opened, there was I. I think that was an important thing. I've never been nervous because I've never thought I mattered. I thought probably if they think I'm a fool, I know better than they are how right they are. And so it didn't matter. And if you can forget yourself in anything that you do, you will find that then, I remember years ago, I had just spent a month in seclusion, and it was not a proper seclusion. I wrote quite a few books during that month. But at the end of it, then I was scheduled in a week to begin a heavy schedule of different things. And Padma, who was in charge of Crystal Clarity, said it's our 20th anniversary, 1988, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a book about Ananda? I'd already written one, but a more up-to-date one. And I said, Padma, I know it's good, but my goodness, I've spent a month writing. I've only got a week now. Give me some time to rest. I couldn't possibly do it. And she's a very persistent lady. And she said, well, it would be nice. And so I had to admit to myself, yes, it would be nice, but it's absolutely impossible. And the next day I thought, well, it would be nice. I said, but I can't do it. And then my superconscious came back and said, of course you can't do it, but he can do anything. Master can do anything through you. And so I thought, all right, let's give him a chance. And I just sort of opened up the floodgates and said, you do it through me. And I found that it was just flowing. You know, I almost had to do no editing on that book, which is very extraordinary. But it just flowed. And it took less than a week, because what happened was that the second day, believe it or not, Muktan was working on the electricity and turned the switch that made me lose all my work on my computer for that day. This was toward the end of the day. And I was so heartbroken, not heartbroken in that sense, but so discouraged that I just couldn't think about it. The next day, too, I just couldn't do any work. So I lost 2 whole days that week. Then the third day, I thought, well, I've got to get my energy together and try. And in spite of that, in 4 days, I wrote Cities of Light, which is really one of our best books. But my solution to that was that I can't do it, but he can. And this I have found again and again in my life. People say, what wonderful things you've done. I've said, the reason is that I haven't done any of them. He's done it. And you'll be amazed at how much he can do through you. I've never been interested in setting myself up as somebody who does something nobody else can do. What's the point of that kind of lesson? To discourage everybody? I want to show people that they can do what I've done, because this is the truth. Every one of us human beings specializes on the part of the whole human race in being himself. Each person is unique. Each person has unique talents. Each man has a melody to sing. Each one, God has something special to say through. And each one of us should try to think in terms of, what can he do through me? Well, this is partly what Ananda is all about. It is not the work of Swami Kriyananda. It is the work of all of us together. I have deliberately kept myself back. When I was a singing student in college, my teacher told me, she was an old lady, and she said, I'm living for only one thing now, and that's to see you become a great singer. And I thought, what's the use of being a singer? Singing other people's thoughts, and the usual garbage that they put out is hardly worth giving your life to. O cessate di piagarmi, o lasciatemi morir. Sounds wonderful in Italian, but when you translate it, it means simply, stop bugging me and let me die. What kind of an exalted image is that? And I thought, I never went back to her. But I have got a supposedly good voice. I am a singer, among other little things. But having written these songs, I've gotten the choir to sing. I haven't tried to push myself. I've tried to let other people sing solos. This is the way to lead. Get other people doing it. Don't think you can do it, even if you know you can do it better. Let other people do it. That way they become to shine. They come to shine, and they begin to show their own ability. And when you've got hundreds and thousands of people all shining in this way, each one expressing his own inner quality, even if it be only a smile, people are affected. I know Corral was talking to me about his Muslim parents in Turkey and how naturally they were upset his coming here. But when they came here and met the people of Ananda and saw how kind they are, that was what really impressed them. And this is what has impressed so many people who have come to Ananda and have seen the kindness here, the sincere desire to help other people, the sincere desire to help others to grow. When we talk of communities, I think we need to understand that there are certain principles without which community can't work. And the leadership is probably the first thing, because you need a leader to draw people together. You need a leader to enthuse people. And he has to be, therefore, among other things, himself very enthusiastic. He has to really believe in what he's doing. And I am that kind of person. If I know I told Dayamata many years ago that you could give me anything to do here that you like. You could have me cleaning toilets. It wouldn't matter to me. But I will say this, that if you have me cleaning toilets, all the monks will want to clean toilets. Because whatever I do with enthusiasm. I want to urge all of you to do with enthusiasm whatever you do. I have spent my life with a lot of enthusiasm working for God. And you know the strange thing is, it doesn't matter a damn to me. On one level it matters intensely. On another level I could have done nothing and been just as happy. I have reached the point of being 82 and sometimes feeling very tired. And I've wondered how much longer I have to live. Fortunately today I'm feeling very energetic. But there are many times lately when I've just wondered how long I can hang in there. But I feel it doesn't matter. I've done what I had to do, and if I hadn't done it, it wouldn't matter. I'm just one little person, one little pebble on this great riverbed. But each one of us, if we can, we should try. We should understand that God has not put us here only to entertain us, but to help us to learn to be good actors. God created the universe through beings, high beings, who, serving in His name, were able to manifest even the galaxies. But all is His doing. And it's so much more wonderful when we can understand Him as the doer. People's first thought is, but what about me? Well, but don't I count? If you can get rid of that thought, which is a perfectly natural thought, that, listen, when you make a mistake, be glad that you've seen that's a mistake. Somebody wrote to me yesterday from India saying she felt so badly because she was so selfish and angry with people all the time and getting into moods, and what could she do about it? I said, the first step, and be grateful for it, is to see that this is what you're like. I'm not going to try to tell you you're not like that. You are like that. So try to change. We all can be perfect. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your God and Father in heaven is perfect. This is our job. And any imperfection, when you see an imperfection in a diamond, you don't throw the diamond away. You rub out that imperfection. Make it perfect. And so when you see that you are selfish, or get angry too easily with people, or jealous, or all the qualities that people are heir to, the first step in overcoming it is gratitude for realizing that you are this. Most people are not aware of themselves as they are. One of the wonderful things about community is that you've got a lot of friends who are on your side spiritually. They're not there to flatter you and try to get something out of you for their own selves. They're perfectly willing to, at your speed and in the way that you need it, to help you to grow. And if you fall, they don't sneer at you and kick you further down. They try to help you and to lift you. Because we're all together in one boat, trying to reach the same shore. We're working together. So when we make mistakes, which we all do as human beings, our job is to help one another. And the first thing is to learn when and how to criticize kindly. Why are you always angry? That doesn't help somebody. That word always should be stricken out of the vocabulary. You always do so and such, when in fact you may have done it last Thursday for the first time in 50 years. Get rid of that word. It's the worst word in a marriage, always. But if you can understand it and look at people from their point of view and help them to grow, there are ways. It was wonderful living with Master and seeing how perfect he was in drawing people out. The modern myth about him is that he was very stern and very disciplinarian. Well, he could be with those who needed it. He was also extremely kind. I remember one time when we monks in the basement dining room, I must say, were by no means orderly. And he came into the dining room one time, and the place could not have been a greater mess. Unwashed dishes, and it was a disgrace, I'll admit it frankly. And he said, well, it might be worse. He knew when to criticize. He knew when to win. I remember one time he said something to me that sort of rankled. And I said to him later, please criticize me more, because I wanted to be corrected. I wanted to grow. And he looked at me, he said, I understand. But you don't need criticism, you need devotion. He always gave that which we needed. And so in a community where you've got a group of people living together and trying to do well, each one knowing that he must be imperfect or he wouldn't be on this level of existence. Each one, therefore, looks at the other and tries to think, how can I help him if he needs help? Or how can I help matters if it's matters that need help? Whatever it might be, basically speaking, you've got a group of hundreds of people living together whose first thought is not, why are you wrong? Why have you done this? Why is this happening? But why am I wrong? What have I done to attract this? What is wrong in me to be unhappy about this when other people can take it well? And so you see very seldom in this community that people are unkind to each other. It happens because people are people. But you see it very little. And you see in just about everybody the willingness and the will to help one another, to be kind to one another, and to inspire one another. Now, there's another wonderful thing in a community, because, of course, people are on different levels of understanding. People are not all perfect, and some of them are far from perfect. But they've come with a purpose, yes. Still, it does happen sometimes that some people think more in terms of themselves, and other people think more in terms of helping other people. And when you see people over a period of 40 years, you begin to understand that it isn't this person who is showing good quality or bad quality, or what makes this quality good or bad. It's also the fact that anybody who shows that quality will be either happy or unhappy. And in every case we have seen that those people who thought first of themselves were the least happy. Those who forgot themselves and thought about helping others and doing what was right and serving the community, they were always happy. And when you see this happen once or twice, which in the world, you don't, especially nowadays, people bounce around from city to city and home to home. The average American moves about 14 times in his life. I remember one time when my parents were in Egypt. I was in Los Angeles. One of my brothers was in Houston. Another one was in Connecticut. One grandparent was in Oklahoma. Another aunt of mine was in Ohio. Everybody spread all over the map. So you don't get to see people that much before they move on. But in a community, you get to see people for many years together, and you get to see them in their different moods. You see which mood works and which doesn't. And it doesn't take long for a little common sense to say, well, I prefer that mood, that attitude, which makes me happy. And I prefer not to have that, which makes me unhappy. And with this example, we find that people are given the encouragement to grow in a way that they would not have living in the world, where everybody tends to justify himself for anything that he is or does. I believe that communities are the most important thing going on today. Intentional communities. You know, in the beginning, we had a certain mixture of people because they were devotees. We said, okay, come. And they weren't devotees of one path. So somebody in the kitchen would be cooking with onions, and somebody would come in and say, Krishna doesn't like onions. This person would say, well, Yogananda does. And I mean, all these stupid little superficial differences in religion are the thing that make people fight each other. It's not the fundamentals. We all know that God is love, and we should love God and be kind and so on. But it's in the little tiny things that the differences show up. Or supposing you know that somebody who lives here is a fundamentalist Christian. He comes here because he loves God, but he's fundamentalist and he absolutely rejects reincarnation. Well, either you're going to fight with him all the time, or since you have to live with him in the same living room practically, you try to avoid the subject when he's in the room. Well, if you think of 100 or more people all together, you have to avoid this subject here and that subject there, it makes absolute sense for people who are living together to be on the same path and to have the same basic beliefs. I think this is a criterion that without which we cannot expect Master's ideal of communities to spread everywhere. I'm sure it will happen in time that people's ideals will be lower and they will have simply ideals of harmony and so on. But think, water cannot flow higher than its source. It flows downward from that source. And so that these first communities that I have founded, that we have founded together, they should be of the highest type. And looking back over 40 years, I'm so grateful to all of you. I mean, when I was looking at you up there in the choir, when I look out across this group of people here, I see so many kind faces, so many good faces. People are not only good because they come here, they also become good in coming here. And if the world can see an example of a few people who live together in harmony, isn't that what everybody really wants? Nobody wants to live in disharmony, in hatred, in anger. The reason for morality, I've read books on philosophy. You know, one of the greatest testing periods of my life came shortly after I left SRF. It wasn't that particular trauma that I'm talking about. It was the fact that a month before I did have to be on my own, I read an article by the professor of philosophy at MIT discussing the different philosophies of modern times. And all those philosophers were atheists, cynics, didn't believe in truth. Jean-Paul Sartre, who believed that morality is just whatever you want to call it, just do that and be sincere. And they use modern science and modern knowledge and modern everything to justify this belief. And it did not make sense to me. I had been on this path for 14 years, and I knew they had the tiger by the tail instead of closing his mouth. It was not the way to do it. And so I decided this would be a wonderful thing if I could spend the time to do the research and answer their charges, not from my point of view, but from their own arguments. Well, this was the hardest period of my life in that sense, along with the other, of course, as you know. But going to the library and reading all these atheistic philosophers and all their reasoning and trying to understand it sympathetically rather than rejecting it as I automatically would. Going into the camp of the enemy, you might say like a spy, to understand where he's coming from, and then using his own arguments against him. And it was really a great triumph. That book of mine, Out of the Labyrinth, and then the next book, Hope for a Better World, these are two very important books for those who have been influenced, I might almost say infected, by the modern science of immorality and atheism and meaninglessness. Because they've shown, in terms of their own arguments, I remember after my 4 chapters I wrote on evolution, dealing with Darwinian evolution and trying to see it sympathetically and understand it from its own point of view, and then showing how in terms of its own arguments, it was not the whole story by any means. Anyway, Leon Kolb was a Jewish professor from Stanford. He'd retired, and I thought it would be very interesting to get his feedback on these chapters, because he'd specialized in evolution himself, and he was completely in the camp of the Darwinists. And so I asked him if he would read these chapters, and I explained why I wanted him to. Well, I thought, being Jewish, that he would be religious, but he was not religious. Or if he was, it was in a rather different way from what I would define as religion. And he denounced me just vigorously, enthusiastically. You're completely wrong. It's absolutely accidental. Evolution has no meaning at all. He went down the whole line. I said, listen, I've read that argument. I know the argument. Please, I only ask you this. Read what I've written. So he said, all right, I'll read it. But it's completely accidental. And I came back to him after he'd read it. And he said, this is wonderful. He said, you haven't denied anything that science says, but you've given it meaning. He said, we must spread this everywhere. Well, this is what I feel those books should accomplish. And I suppose that by the time everybody comes to agree with it, they'll read it, they won't mean anything. Because that's the hardship of paving new roads. But I do think it's a very important book, because it shows also that, yes, moral values are relative, but they're relative in a directional sense. And you can be more, it all depends upon you. It doesn't depend on what the government says. It doesn't depend on what the Bible says, or the Quran says, or the Vedas say. Why do they say these things? Because mankind has discovered over many, many years that certain things work and certain things don't work. When Jesus said, it is more blessed to give than to receive, he didn't mean that after suffering all your life by giving up everything and letting other people walk over you like a washboard, that finally you'll be getting your blessings in heaven. He meant it's more blissful. When you give to others instead of taking from them, you are happier. And this is not the first thought of a child. It's not the first thought of a human being when he comes into his ego, but it's what he discovers after long and hard experience. That when I share with others, I expand my sense of identity, and in that expansion, I feel happier. And this is true with all moral values. They may seem inconvenient, they may seem unpleasant and difficult in the beginning, but if you live by them, you find that bit by bit you become free inside, happy inside, and more you have a sense of bliss. But on the other hand, the more you grab for yourself, the more you're squeezing upon your little ego and your thought, what's in it for me? finally just suffocates you. All you have to do is look around at people and see those egotists who think they're everything are not happy people. The happy people, I've got this wonderful slideshow. It's called Different Worlds. Most of you have seen it. And it's a wonderful show because it shows people in different parts of the world, different costumes, different colored skin, different languages, different nationalities. But all of them show basic attitudes that are human. And you can see clearly that some attitudes work and other attitudes don't work. And then in the end you see people who are serviceful. And you see members of Ananda primarily, from whom I had the best choice. You see their radiance, their happiness. This is what Ananda is about. Ananda is not showing how a group of people can live together self-sufficiently. And that's an important motive, an important understanding. But I never hold out, for example, the perfectly obvious reason for living in a community. That's the best insurance possible. You lose a job, the community's there to help soften your blow and find you a new job. You lose your job out in the world and you can be destroyed. You lose your health and you've got a whole group of people trying to help you. Out in the world you may soon go through all your savings and find you have nothing. It's the best insurance I can imagine. It makes the most common sense. Why don't I talk about it? Because that's not the kind of people I want to attract. I don't want people coming here just because it's a good insurance. But indeed, that will become more and more a motive for people coming together in small groups. There was a town, I should say, in the Midwest in the Depression in the 1930s, who sailed through it without any trouble. They developed their own currency, and they became completely self-sufficient. We find that communities can do this. Gandhi said that where you have 1,000 people, you need about 1,000 people to make a community self-sufficient. With 1,000 people, one can be a barber, another can be a grocer, all the different things, but they can all be useful and participate in a productive way. Damanhur in Italy is a community, actually quite a lot larger than ours, a very good community, and they have their own currency. I think it would be a good thing to think about. Now, we don't have 1,000 people living here, but when you think of all our communities together, then we do. There's the possibility that's just been suggested to us that maybe Ananta and Maria buy some land, we at Ananda buy some land, up around Marysville, Yuba City, where it's low down enough for the crops to be year-round and more productive than up here where it's cold in the winter for so many months. And that we develop a farming system there that can feed all our communities. The community in Sacramento, in Palo Alto, they've got some self-sufficiency, but not enough. If we had one community that was really dedicated to that, it could supply food to all our communities. This again, you can be 1,000 people, but be spread out and have that sense of township in our day and age, which you could not have even back in the time of Mahatma Gandhi. But if we can work together in this way, and I would like to urge all of you to think in terms of support, because I do think, and I think it's an important thing to state, Master, you don't know how strongly he spoke about the coming depression. He spoke before his time because he didn't have this time. But he said it would be much worse than the 1930s. A friend of ours, Nadia, in Italy, was talking to a prominent banker in Venice who said that the situation is much, much worse than people realize. Padma's brother lives in Holland, and he said that one of the major newspapers in Holland, just recently, after the fiscal year of June, it was in the beginning of July, said that in days or weeks, 6,000 banks in America would fail because they don't have the insurance to meet their needs. Will it happen? No, it probably will not happen. And you know why? Because there are two kinds of taxation that a country can impose. One is the obvious taxes. But no country can get from people everything that it wants from them to do all the things that it wants to do, especially in socialistic countries, which is what America is becoming more and more, where the government does everything for you. The hidden taxation is inflation. You print more money. What you do, of course, is destroy the value of the currency. That is why a dollar in 1940 is worth about 5 cents today. And in time of like 6,000 banks failing, the greater probability to their failing, or then their failing, whatever the word is, here I'm a writer, I ought to know, is that the government will print dollars like mad. And I do think we're heading into a hyperinflation. The days in Germany, it was only days, they couldn't go on longer, they just collapsed. But a sausage in the morning would cost you a wheelbarrow of money. The same day in the afternoon, that would be 2 sausages in the morning. In the afternoon, the same amount of money would only buy 1 sausage. One person took his paycheck to a shop in a wheelbarrow, and he left it outside because he thought, well, who's going to bother about this money? It's worthless anyway. So he went into the shop. When he came out, he found the money blowing all over the street. His wheelbarrow had been stolen. This is something that many countries have gone through, and this is where we're headed right now. I seriously believe it. I think that in the months and years to come, we're going to see serious problems. A friend of mine in Vinod Taylor, he's an Indian man, and the word tailor was somehow came about, I suppose, during the English occupation because one of his forefathers was a tailor. But he's very active in the financial scene. And he said something which I'm afraid is possible, although here it is August and it hasn't happened yet, and Bush won't be around that long. But he said that he thinks that the way Bush will try to pull his way out of depression will be to go to war with Iran. Now, that's a dismaying and altogether frightening possibility, because going to war is one way of pulling yourself out of depression. You print the dollars to create the weapons. This world is in a mess. And when you look at Putin, he looks to me like a crocodile. There's just something wrong there. I know that Russia recently invaded Georgia. Well, it's going to keep on doing that. The Muslim terrorist scene that you see around, it's growing. And it's a terrible thing. Supposing everybody were to become a brotherhood of Islam, they'd all bite each other's necks. There's no brotherhood there. We've got to understand that peace will come not through beliefs, but through human behavior. When we can learn to see God in all, when we can learn to be charitable toward all, that's what all religions are really about, then we can change. But we're coming to a time of great hardship. And communities are one of the ways of saving ourselves from that hardship. Master said there, I know Tikayan has said that there are 30,000 nuclear weapons in the world. That is to say, 30,000 known nuclear weapons. Who knows how many thousands of others exist? People don't arm themselves with the thought of going to sleep at night. They arm themselves with the thought of burglars coming. And finally, the nearest cat will do. They'll shoot at anything. We're heading for a serious time, not just financially. Globally, global warfare is inevitable, I'm afraid. You know, there's something Padre Pio said. He said that there will be 3 days of darkness. Garabandal, the Virgin Mary there, said something similar. And I was really quite startled to hear somebody tell me that he had read that Master said there would be 3 days of darkness. What can Master, when he was in the middle of a lecture in Hollywood Church, talking about the economy, he talked a lot about the need for getting together and pooling your resources and buying a little land in the country. And Ananda is it's sort of at the pinnacle, but from Ananda I would like to see many communities of different types spring up. I don't even want them, what to speak of, expect them all to be Ananda communities. I've tried to make them all autonomous so that we wouldn't have this big mother center here directing everything. It kills it. If it can grow from the soil, if the people can be independent and be united by their own ideals, that's the most important thing of all. But there are many ideals, there are many ways of approaching life and approaching God and so on. I would like Ananda to be an inspiration for people to learn to, even a group of 12 people living together. This is a very important stage, and Master was talking about that. Just a few people, he used to say, if you take nothing else from me, take this. Get land in the country where you can grow your own food. People have talked about the importance of owning gold. You can't eat gold. Much more important is food. Much more important is having land where you can grow your own food. And this is what we're doing more and more now at Ananda too. But having that opportunity and living simply. You know, when we began Ananda, I don't want to call those the golden days because truly I believe these are the golden days, but I must say it was a wonderful thing having no housing, no nothing, living in teepees and trailers, and yet it was such a simple life. No running water, no opportunity to take baths except in a central bathhouse. It was simple living. And I think that people ought to be prepared for living simply until they can gradually build up what we have today. And Ananda, life begins at 40, as I said. We can build beautifully here. I think God put us in this world to help make it a better world. This is why when my father left me some money, I used it to build Crystal Hermitage as a place of beauty that would be a spiritual center for the whole community. This is what I'd like to see us do with all of Ananda. Make it a place of beauty. But above all, simplicity of life is the most important thing. Now, when Master spoke, however, of this, he stopped in the middle of his talk and he shouted. He said, "You don't know what a terrible cataclysm is coming." Now, cataclysm doesn't mean depression, doesn't mean war. At least in my vocabulary, it means something God made, not man made. What cataclysm could create 3 days of darkness? I would think only maybe a comet hitting this world, not a volcano, not something that would stir up the dust into the atmosphere. That would take years to settle. But 3 days of darkness to me implies only the planet not moving for 3 days. The other side of the planet would be in daylight for 3 days. This side would be in darkness for 3 days. But I can see that as the only possibility if these predictions are true. And what Padre Pio said, what Yogananda said, these are things to be listened to. But they said in those 3 days, don't go out of doors. There will be gases in the air and things that could kill you. Stay indoors, keep the windows closed, and be safe. But who knows what it means? I think, however, it can mean just that. Until finally, the world having been stopped, then the internal momentum builds up again and it begins to spin again. But am I giving prophecy of my own? I don't know. I've always felt that something very serious is coming. Be prepared for that. But living simply together in the country, don't think that your job will mean a thing once things fall apart. Put aside some money. Get together with friends. Come here and live with us. Live in our different communities. Or if you live in the cities, try with a few friends to put money together so you can buy, say, 10 acres out in the country. We talked about this 40 years ago. People looked as if we were crazy. I remember a meeting I had in my apartment in San Francisco. Jyotish was there. And I had invited a few friends to try to talk to them about the need for starting communities. And we had a few outsiders slip in who didn't know anything about us and were all denouncing everything we were trying to do. And I remember this one person who said, I know somebody who tried to do that and he became so big-headed today, he's a monster. And there was nothing to do after all that but serve tea and cookies. But then I sat down and wrote intentional communities, how to start them and why. You need to have an intention in what you're doing. There's a series of cartoons that I saw, 3 cartoons in one cartoon, or 1 cartoon in 3, in Punch magazine in England many years ago. All these people in a train station were sitting around, leaning on their umbrellas, sitting on their luggage, talking. Then the next picture, one person running. Third picture, everybody running after him. In this world, although you speak of majority rule, the fact is that majority of people don't really care very much. I asked my horse driver in Kashmir in April of 1989, which would you rather be under, India or Pakistan? He was Muslim, of course, as 95% of the people there are. He said, frankly, sir, we don't care, whoever feeds us. That's the usual human attitude. They're not the fanatics. Most people just want to be left alone. But the thing is, too, that most people don't have any real intention. Their intention is to get from the A of the cradle to the C of the grave, and somehow survive in the meantime. There isn't much idealism pushing them. They want to have a happy life with their family and to be bothered as little as possible and to survive as many crises as possible, or to have as few as possible. But the truth is that when you find somebody with a serious intention, he's the one who changes history. Look at Buddhism. It took a handful of Buddhists to change the face of India and then of the whole Orient. Look at the life of Christ with 12 disciples and maybe 70 people he sent around to teach. A very small group, an outcast by their own people. But because they had a strong intention, they had an impact far larger than that of the few people who were there. You'll see this again and again in history. This again is why Jesus Christ, it must have been he, although we don't read it in the Bible, but when we find his close disciples trying to start communities, which is written in the Acts of the Apostles, you have to assume it came from him. The church managed to kill that because it didn't like the idea of people making up their own minds. It liked to control people. When William the Conqueror, Catherine's writing a fascinating book on William and Henry. What makes their life fascinating is that Master, when I grew up in Romania, I studied the Calvert system from England because I was English born and American born. But I read Our Island Story year after year. And William the Conqueror became fixed in my mind as one of the great villains of history. And when I discovered that he was my own guru, it was rather a surprise, to say the least. But because I completely believed in him and didn't believe the historians, I always agreed with Napoleon's assessment of history, that history is a lie agreed upon. And so I began reading up on William. And I came to see he was a very great man. and very noble. And Catherine is writing this book, and it's really a very interesting book. I think you're going to find it amazing. We got 2 fascinating books coming out. Well, apart from my books. One is Catherine's book on William and Henry. I believe I was Henry then, and it's very interesting to see the parallels. And the other is Purushottama's book on the yogas. He and Vyasa have written this book, and it's a work of genius. I really recommend it, and I don't know, where's Puru? Is he here? Huh? Get with it. I asked Asha to ask you, when are you going to... Now, this is a very important book. Sri Yukteswar wrote that thing about the yogas, and it seems interesting. But now that you see the proof of it over more than 100 years, the evidence piling up just incontrovertibly, and it shows us the direction in which we are going and how we can improve on that direction by working with it instead of against it. In fact, the real struggle we're facing today is between the old Kali Yuga belief that things are fixed and dogmas are fixed and forms are fixed and everything is fixed, to the Dwapara Yuga thought of everything is a flow, everything is energy. It's a completely new way of looking at life. And this is what is causing the huge upset in human consciousness today, the conflict between old ways of looking at things and new ways. Communism is, you might say, the last gasp of Kali Yuga, using Dwapara Yuga energy to justify Kali Yuga institutions. But what Puru is, and Vyasa, but Puru is doing the actual writing now, and Vyasa gathered a lot of the information, and it's their book together. But it's a work, as I said, of genius. It's a wonderful work. And anything you can do to help push him along and not say, come to dinner tonight. I don't want to put you in a bind. But I am enthusiastic for that book. Vyasa made the mistake of starting with Kali Yuga. You have to start with what you know. Vyasa is a scientist. He's not a salesman. Puru's a salesman. He knows you have to catch people where they are and then build on that. So we've started with the history we know, with the people we know, with the conditions we know, and then gradually imagined conditions beyond there. And the imagination may be a little stretched. This we can't say. But you know, the idea of Treta Yuga, the Yuga of consciousness, of ideas, of mental Yuga. Higher consciousness is Satya Yuga. But the thought that people in this age, it says that the delusion of space will be annihilated. Well, Sri Yukteswar wrote that back in the bullock cart days, didn't he? 1894. Nowadays there are airplanes, space shuttles, talk of going into outer space, going to other planets, airplanes, radio, television. I mean, you name it. Everything that we know of modern culture began since those days. In fact, Sri Yukteswar, in 1900, instituted a parade through the streets of Serampore to announce the arrival of Dwapara Yuga proper. And he was stoned because people wouldn't believe it. Nowadays still, the usual teaching in India is that we are still in Kali Yuga, in the Dark Age. But you see around you signs everywhere that man's understanding is coming up. And in the next age of Treta Yuga, not only space but time will be annihilated. And you know, it's a very interesting thing that I discovered a book in India, many people know about it. There are true versions and false versions. But I must say the one I found was incredible. It's the sage Brigu wrote in the time of Treta Yuga and described people living in our age today. And he described my life. It was amazing. It said, first of all, I'd had 2 readings, and one said I've already given him a reading in another part of my segment of my book, so I'll give him another reading now. And it went back 8 lifetimes to the time of Kurukshetra. And it talked about that life. But then in this life it said he was born in Romania. He's grown up in America. His father named him James. Well, James Donald Walters is my full first name. He has 2 brothers possible, but no living sister is possible, although one will die in his mother's womb. I didn't even know my mother had had a miscarriage, but when I went home I asked her, she said yes, she had. He said many things about my life that have come true. The other one was less true because, as he said, this one is by the power of yoga, that is by the science of astrology. And that changed because of Master's own will that my life take another direction. But the thing is that in that age, time doesn't mean anything. And in the highest age, a majority of people understand basically that everything is God, everything is consciousness. And we go through these cycles. But this changing of the guards, you might say, from Kali Yuga to Dwapara Yuga is what we're undergoing today, and it's the reason for all the upset. And it's the reason for any huge cataclysm that might come to this world. The polar shifts may be there. I know Master said that in Boston in 200 years, people will have dark skin. Does that mean, I suppose it will mean, that they are tropical? Whatever the case, we must understand that we're living in a very crucial time. Now, here is a very interesting thing. Under hypnosis, somebody regressed a lot of people to their last lives to ask the question, why did you choose to be born in this time? Not one spoke of the hardships. All of them accepted the hardship, but they saw it as opportunity. Don't look upon the hardships ahead as anything but an opportunity for growth. During periods of hardship, you can grow enormously compared to the periods of peace. Be grateful for hardship when it comes, but then think, what can I do about it in a practical way? People sometimes look at my life and see all the tests I've had to go through, and they are horrified. I say, what tests? Really, it's been a wonderful life. It's been a life of joy and of service. Oh yeah, there have been a few little problems, but what do they matter when you can come out of it feeling happier, more blissful, when you see how much good it's done? Don't worry. Master said that conditions are always neutral. It's how you interpret them that make them seem good or bad. And death and suffering. Well, I know when I went into the hospital last December, Padma and Hiriman were there, and I was going in to have a major rip-out, you might say, not rip-off. They took about this much of my intestines, and you'd have to call that fairly major surgery. I didn't even think about it. I was singing to them. I said, I don't know why my voice has become deeper in the last few months. None may linger on the way. And I was singing this song, and I just felt blissful going in. And when I came out, I felt blissful. Everything that happens to you, you can be blissful if you have something in yourself, and that's the only place you ever have anything. When you enjoy a beautiful sunset, well, a turtle could look at the same sunset and not think of it as beautiful. A materialist could look at the sunset and think it reminds him of ham and eggs. Why do you say it's beautiful? Because you have some capacity in yourself to respond to beauty. You have some capacity in yourself to respond to things and say, this makes me happy. And if you can understand that, you can realize that you have control over your happiness, so that even when things go wrong, there's that beautiful story Vivekananda told of this monk, this Swami, who was going out for a walk one day, and he came back. His whole back was bleeding, and the monks were horrified, and they said, "Oh dear, what happened?" He said, "Oh, we had such a wonderful time today. The children were throwing stones, and that they were throwing stones at him didn't enter the picture. He was just happy that they were happy. Now this is a level of lack of ego that takes a certain working toward. Nonetheless, you'll be surprised how true it is that if you can really take anything that comes to you and say, "Thank you, God, you've taught me a good lesson." You go to see Hamlet in the movies, and you think afterwards, what a wonderful movie. What a wonderful drama. I learned something from it. Why can't you do that when yourself suffer? Suffering is only because we've defined it as that which should not be. When you say, well, if it is, then it is, so let it be, you'll find that anything that comes to you. Long ago, I just decided, if Ananda fails, fine. If it succeeds, fine. I'm not going to tie my happiness to its success or failure. As a result, I've been happy through all the ups and downs. When Jyotish and Devi lost their house in the fire here in 1976, Devi, of course, was suffering because she'd just 10 days earlier given birth to their first son, their only son, and now they had nothing. And Jyotish said, well, at least it solved the problems we were having with leaks. This is the right attitude. Look at the positive side. You know, well, when we had the fire that destroyed our temple up at the seclusion retreat, and I went into a shop that day, and there was a French woman out here on Tylerfoot Road, and I was singing a song, and she said, "You're singing?" I said, "Well, why not? I've lost a temple. I haven't lost my voice." And she said, "Oh my goodness, when my house burned ground, 6 months I weep." I thought, why waste 6 months? You can be happy today. It doesn't matter. Just decide that you will be happy, or tell yourself this: I know I'll be happy sooner or later. No one's going to be suffering forever over some little broken toenail. So why wait all that time? Why not say, I'm going to be happy right now? This is the lesson that we learn when you're in a community. When you're in the world, it's harder to learn, because people make such a big thing of every little thing that happens to them. And when you act differently, they sort of make you think that there's something wrong with you. When you've got a community committed to this ideal, you've got something that can change the world. I think Ananda has the power, and this little group of people here right now has the power to uplift the world. And at the time of suffering that mankind is going through, with bombs falling everywhere, and that's no fun, I grant you, nonetheless, if you can have God in your heart, He will first of all do this for you. You won't feel that pain. This is what I have seen, that when you have faith in God, whatever pain would come is minimized or non-existent. Joan of Arc, who suffered burning at the cross, burning at the stake, she didn't suffer. Outwardly her body must have suffered, but inwardly she didn't. Those who go thinking of God and for God, they go in bliss. I've often thought I'd much rather die a martyr. I mean, let my death be useful too. Why waste time with a heart attack? But the truth is, I'm not entirely joking, because my life is just for other people. I'd rather be useful. But the thing is that God will protect you. God will be with you. And whatever happens to your body, He will give you joy if you live in Him. So that whatever happens, it will be your salvation. Ultimately speaking, I think that's the most important thing. That communities, a body without a head is just like a chicken with its head cut off, running in circles and accomplishing nothing. When you have the Spirit, when you have God, when you know that your purpose in life is to find God, when that's your intention in this world, then nothing can touch you. You will find His bliss sustaining you always. And when you leave this world, you will go into bliss. This, I think, is the most important thing I can share with you, and you can share with other people. It isn't the explanation of the teachings, it isn't the buildings we've built, but if you feel this love for people in your heart, and here's the best reason I can think of for loving everybody. Everyone in the world is seeking the same things you are. We're all seeking Satchidananda. We're all seeking eternal, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss. And we think that we'll find it in wrong ways. This is our delusion. And that's why we suffer. We think we'll get it through money, and we don't get it. We think we'll get it through sex, and we don't get it. We think we'll get it through fame, and we don't get it. We think we'll get it through power. All the things that people want. And the marvelous thing about human nature is that it's so infinitely ingenious. As Master said, people are so skillful in their ignorance. And if this face doesn't do it, that face will. If this job doesn't do it, that job will. If this money will do it, that money will. And you can go on for literally days of Brahma. Each day of Brahma lasting billions of years. In the Gita, it says, when I manifest myself out in creation again, I throw the whole population out that has still wandered, going each one to his own state. And in the Rubhatavomakayam, it states in symbolic term that many who come out into this world at the beginning of a day of Brahma are still wandering in delusion at the end of it. It's so easy to go on and on and on, always trying something else. This is one of the things that drew me to the spiritual path, the sheer terror of realizing my own fallibility, of realizing how easy it would be to fall into any of the delusions that people are heir to, and the absolute horror that I had. Without God, I thought nobody can be safe. When I met Master, I was a fruit ripe for picking. I really was desperate. I think in a way you have to have that desperation. You have to be a little like that young man who came to a saint and asked to be accepted as the disciple, and the saint took him down to a river and held his head under water. And finally, when he let him come up, he said, "What did you want more than anything else?" And the young man said, "Air, air." And the saint said, "When you want God that badly, come back." We have to have this intention. We have to know that this is, without God, life is a body without a head. Everybody in the world is seeking that same bliss, but why should we love everybody? Because they all want the same thing we do. Everybody, be he the worst mafiosi, really wants bliss. And if anything, we should feel compassion for people who don't understand that. Because you know they're barking up the wrong tree. You know that they're going to suffer. However much suffering they cause others, they're going to cause much more to themselves. Therefore, look at everybody and feel a smile of compassion in your heart. They're all your brothers and sisters. And when you have that feeling, and it's easier when everybody responds in kind, this can be your sermon wherever you go. You don't have to get up on a soapbox and declare the truths you know. Just be the truth you are. In Paris, many years ago, it was my birthday, and I was just passing through Paris, and I wanted to go to a concert in a church. And I got to the gate just as they were closing the door. They said there's no more room in the church, and there were about 50 people outside who were being prevented from coming in. And I was so outraged. I said, "But it's my birthday." And he said, "Alors, bon anniversaire, entrez," and he let me come in as a birthday present. And he had to put me behind the altar, and there was a completely full hall of 700 people, but there were a very small handful of us behind the altar in this church. And later it was wonderful music, full of joy, and I just was immersed in the joy of it. But later I was on the underground, the metro, And this old woman came to me and she said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Well, no." She said, "Well, I was in the audience. 700 people." You know what that means is that she felt a connection with me that seemed to her personal. This is what I have found that complete strangers will have with you. The more you feel that God is in them, the more you can share your bliss with them, the more you can feel that you want to encourage them, you want to give them something. This is what Ananda can give the world. That's why we've chosen the name Ananda, joy. The more you are doing that, the more you can do more than anything else you can do here in the way of starting a thing. Be a child of God. Share your childhood of God with other people. And know that what you are doing today is the strongest antidote to the sufferings that are bound to come, because man is drawing them on himself. But remember in your heart, suffering is that which we define as suffering, that which we define as what we don't want to be. And once you accept that it should be, it's fine, it doesn't matter. And death itself, when it comes, well, it's going to come someday. So why not prepare yourself for it now? Prepare yourself for that final exam. And if you can go thinking of God, those who think of the lesser gods go to those gods. Those who think of the ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who think of me come to me. That basically is what Ananda is all about. Not a social experiment, although it is a social experiment, but above all, a way of life that can change humanity, because what we are all looking for is happiness in our own selves. Joy to you.